Philosophy Circle of the Philippines conference today, and today's focus, the discussion will be on accountability and the philosophy of action. The Philosophy Conference of the Philippines has conferences held every few months on Saturdays, and they usually start in the morning. And these conferences have specific focuses. They tend to cater to specific philosophical areas. And in each conference, we have a presenter who is usually from an academic institution that is affiliated with a PCP. After which, 3 reactors will react to the presenter's paper. They have been given 10 days to prepare for their reactions for the primary presenter's paper. The PCP, or the Philosophical Circle of the Philippines, is comprised of individuals from different academic institutions, and they not only are the circle is not only comprised of, say, professors, but also of undergraduates and postgraduates who might not be teaching. The structure of the event is as follows. First, there will be a presenter, and the presenter will be presenting his paper on a specific issue, and after which we will have the 3 reactors present their specific responses to the paper of the presenter. And any questions from the audience will be entertained after all the reactors and the presenter have already presented their papers. First, we shall welcome our first presenter, our primary presenter. He presently ranks in DLSU as an Associate Professor 7 from the Department of Philosophy, and he earned his academic degrees BA Philosophy from the University of the Philippines in 1987, his master's degree in philosophy in the University of the Philippines in 1993, his thesis on the Salus Tractatus Objects, and his PhD in philosophy at Salle University on September 2004. And his dissertation was on the intentionality, mind, and language, the phenomenological and analytic approaches. He has been awarded and honored with the UP Presidential Scholar as a Presidential Scholar of the University of the Philippines, Diliman in 1985 and 1987. He graduated as a magna cum laude AB Philosophy, University of the Philippines, Diliman in 1987, and graduated with high distinction and gold medal for outstanding dissertation in his PhD philosophy in De La Salle University on September 2004. His area of specialization is in the philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, and ethics. Currently, he is the academic chair of the Department of Philosophy in De La Salle University, Manila. He's held that position since 2009 to the present, and he is previously the Graduate Studies Program Coordinator of the Department of Philosophy in De La Salle University, Manila from 2006 to 2012, and he was also previously the Assistant to the Chair in the Department of Philosophy in the University of the Philippines, Diliman from 1996 to year 2002. Please welcome Dr. Napoleon Mabaquiao Jr. from De La Salle University.
Magandang umaga sa inyo lahat. So, nagagala kami na napunta kayo bagamat masama yung panahon. Okay. So I'll be talking about the concept of accountability and how it relates to certain issues in the philosophy of action. Accountability is a necessary consequence of our intelligence and freedom. Our intelligence enables us to distinguish between right and wrong actions, or to identify actions that we ought and ought not to do, while our freedom enables us to choose the kind of action that we would like to perform. Consequently, in choosing to perform actions that we know to be right or wrong, we are accountable for such actions. Generally, we deserve blame for choosing to perform actions we know to be wrong, or for choosing not to perform actions that we know to be right. On the other hand, we deserve praise for choosing to perform actions we know to be right, or for not choosing to perform actions we know to be wrong. The attribution of accountability thus involves the relation among action, intention, and knowledge. When we, however, to begin to consider the various forms our action, intention, and knowledge may take, the attribution of accountability becomes a complex matter, for then we are faced with some philosophical issues. In this lecture, I aim to deal with some of these philosophical issues. Our discussion divides into two parts. The first clarifies the notion of accountability in light of some related notions that accountability is naturally confused with, and in terms of the different conditions that require both its attribution and non-attribution. The second further examines the conditions necessary for the attribution of accountability in light of certain qualifications concerning knowledge and distinctions concerning types of actions. So these are the subtopics that I will deal with. So the two main headings, I'll talk about the meaning of accountability and the conditions under which we attribute it to actions, under which I'll talk about accountability, more specifically how it relates to the notion of responsibility, and then the conditions for its attribution, and then the degrees of accountability, and then the factors beyond our control. And then in part two, I'll talk about issues concerning the relation among knowledge, intention, and action, under which I'll discuss the distinction between real and irresponsible types of ignorance, simple and complex actions and their descriptions, and then the phenomenon called incontinent actions. So let's move on to the first part. Accountability and related concepts. The accountability that I shall examine in this paper is the one that refers to the deservingness of blame or punishment for a wrongful action that one has performed, and of praise or a reward for a rightful action that one has performed. Typical examples are as follows. In helping a person in need, one deserves praise, while in inflicting unnecessary pain to a person, one deserves blame. It is usual to use the word accountability interchangeably with the word responsibility. Responsibility, however, has other significations, of which the two most important for our purposes concern duty or obligation and agency or causation. The kind of responsibility that we have towards persons comes in the form of duties and obligations. Parents, for instance, have responsibilities towards their children, which include the duties to provide for the needs of their children and to train them so that they will become morally upright individuals and socially responsible citizens. In this connection, when a person is mindful of his responsibilities or duties, we describe this person as a responsible person, while as an irresponsible one when otherwise. Now, while responsibility as duty and responsibility as accountability do not refer to the same thing, They are, however, closely related in that responsibility as duty gives rise to responsibility as accountability. More straightforwardly, we deserve blame for failing to perform our duties towards other persons, while we deserve praise for being able to perform them. Furthermore, duties are correlated with rights in that we only have duties towards persons whose rights we acknowledge. To illustrate, it is our duty to tell the doctor diagnosing our illness our medical history, since we acknowledge his right to know it, in order for him to diagnose our illness properly. But to a bystander asking us of our medical history, we do not have such duty. In this consideration, we can thus say also that we are accountable for our actions that respect or violate the rights of persons. That is to say, we deserve blame if our actions violate the rights of other persons, while we deserve praise if our actions respect their rights. Okay, so I'm in the process of clarifying the meaning of accountability because we often confuse it with some related concepts, especially the idea of responsibility. There is a sense in which we use the word accountability as synonymous with responsibility. However, what I'm trying to do here is to talk about the other senses of responsibility with which we should not confuse the notion of accountability. And one of such notion is responsibility as duty. And duty is, correlated with the concept of a right. When we say we have a duty towards a person, it is because we acknowledge the right of that person. So if I say I have a duty to tell you the truth, it is because I acknowledge your right to know the truth. If I don't acknowledge your right, then I don't have a duty. On the other hand, I'm now on the second notion, responsibility as agency. On the other hand, our sense of accountability also needs to be distinguished from responsibility defined simply as the cause of something. When we are speaking of the cause of something in general terms, we use the word cause. But it is customary among philosophers to call this cause an agent when we are referring to a person who happens to be the cause of some action. As such, we say, for instance, that heat is the cause of or is responsible for the expansion of metal, but we say that Oedipus was the agent of his father's death. When an action is done and we ask who is responsible for it, we are sometimes only asking for the agent of this action or the individual who does it. In this context, when we say that for that particular action, the responsible person is X, we just mean that it is X who does such an action. But we do not mean that it is X who deserves blame or praise for such an action. It is possible that X is the agent of a wrongful action, but X does not deserve blame for it. This is because, as we shall see later, there are other conditions for deserving blame or praise for an action than simply being the agent or cause of it. So this is a usual confusion when we say, who is responsible for this action? We may just be saying, who is the agent of this action? Who caused it? Okay? But when we say, this person is responsible for this action, and we just mean that this person is the one who caused it, meaning he's the agent, we don't necessarily mean that this person is accountable in the sense that he deserves blame or punishment for this action. Because as we shall see later on, there are other conditions for the attribution of accountability. Let's move on now to the conditions of accountability ascriptions or attributions. The attribution of accountability to a person for an action that he or she does is a result of two conditions. One is that he or she does the action intentionally. That is to say, he or she has the intention to do such an action, and he or she performs the action to carry out such an intention. We may refer to this condition as the intentionality condition. The other is that the person knows or is capable of knowing that the action he or she is thinking of performing is right or wrong. We may refer to the second condition as the knowledge condition. Putting these two conditions together, we thus say that a person is accountable for his or her action when he or she performs this action intentionally and he or she knows or is capable of knowing that this action is right or wrong. Thus, suppose a sniper shoots at the president in order to kill him. Since the sniper's act of shooting at the president is an intentional action, which he presumably knows or is capable of knowing to be a wrongful act, then he is accountable for such an act. And since such an act is a wrongful act, then he deserves to be blamed or be punished for such an act. On the other hand, suppose a presidential guard, upon seeing the same assassin about to shoot at the president, suddenly decides to save the life of the president by using his body to cover the president. Since this act is clearly intentional, then this presidential guard is accountable for the act of saving the life of the president. And since it is a rightful action, which presumably the presidential guard knows, then he deserves praise or a reward for such an act. In both cases, the knowledge and intentionality conditions obtain, and so the attribution of accountability is legitimate. These two conditions, the intentionality and knowledge conditions, are usually referred to as incriminating conditions, and their opposite as excusing conditions. The excusing conditions in this regard are the absence of the two incriminating conditions. The absence of the intentionality condition would mean that the action under consideration was not done intentionally, while the absence of the knowledge condition would mean that it was done out of ignorance. In the case of the incriminating conditions, next slide please. In the case of the incriminating conditions, both conditions should obtain to make one accountable for his actions. If at least one does not obtain, then one is not accountable for his actions. Another way of putting this is that if at least one of the excusing conditions obtains, then one is excused from accountability for his actions. So we can somewhat symbolize the conditions in this way. So let IC stand for intentionality condition and KC for knowledge condition. So for incriminating conditions, both IC and KC should obtain. So if you are familiar with symbolic logic, we say both IC and KC. Now excusing conditions, not both IC and KC. So if we negate the conjunction, it would mean either of these three possibilities. Meaning IC does not obtain while KC obtains, or IC obtains while KC does not obtain, or both of them do not obtain. Suppose someone jiggles my hand, which causes me to spill my coffee on somebody's laptop. I am not accountable for spilling my coffee on somebody's laptop, for I did not intentionally do it. I know it to be wrong or not a proper thing to do, but since I did not intend to perform such an action, I cannot be blamed for it. In this case, the knowledge condition obtains, but not the intentionality one. Suppose now that the same sniper that we earlier referred to upon shooting at the president, suppose now that the same sniper that we earlier referred to, upon shooting at the president, accidentally shoots at another person, instead who happens to be another assassin who is about to shoot at the president at close range. We may say that the sniper, in effect, saves the life of the president. But he does not really deserve praise for such act, for it is not the action that he intends to perform in the first place. And this is despite his knowledge that saving the life of the president is a good act. In these two cases, the knowledge condition obtains, but not the intentionality one. As such, the agents in these two cases are not accountable for their respective actions. In the first case, however, what the agent of the action does not deserve is blame, while in the second case, what the agent of the action does not deserve is praise. On the other hand, suppose a child mistakes a real gun for a toy gun and then shoots at a person, assuming that this child is of an age where he is not yet capable of discriminating between a real gun and a toy gun, and more importantly, of knowing or understanding that shooting at a person is wrong. This child is therefore excused from any accountability for his or her act. And here the intentionality condition obtains, but not the knowledge one. Next slide. It is often said that we are not living in a perfect world. For there are moments where we know that certain actions are wrong, and yet because of some reasons or circumstances we happen to be in, we decide nonetheless to perform these actions. How do these reasons or circumstances we happen to be in affect our accountability for such actions? We call those that lessen the degree of accountability mitigating factors, while those that increase it aggravating factors. Accountability thus comes in degrees, and four factors generally form the basis of determining such degrees. The first is so these are the mitigating and aggravating factors. These are not excusing conditions. We are still accountable for our actions, but because of the presence of these factors, the degree of our accountability may be increased or lessened. So first, we have pressure or difficulty in life. So certain difficulties in life pressure us to perform actions we know to be wrong in the first place. So we are not excused from doing it. Nonetheless, the degree of pressure that forces us to do it affects the degree of accountability that we have. So the formula here is the greater is the pressure, the lesser is the accountability. So usually in class I give the example of, you know, the novel Les Miserables, the character Jean Valjean. So he stole a loaf of bread from a bakery because his sister and the children of his sister were starving to death. So such great degree of difficulty in life forced him to steal a loaf of bread, though he knew all along that this act is morally wrong. Okay. Now contrast this. I don't know if you have seen the movie The Thomas Crown Affair, wherein I think it was Pierce Brosnan who starred in that movie. He was a billionaire and an eligible bachelor, and because he was bored to life, he stole paintings in a museum for nothing, just to give his life some excitement. Okay, so you have here two reasons for these two individuals to steal something, but they have different reasons, and therefore their accountability must be, the degree of their accountability must be different. Now, intensity and extent of the injury. The greater is the intensity or extent of the injury, the greater is the accountability. Now, I was asked before, what about if you are forced to do something wrong at gunpoint? Will you still be morally accountable? Yes, because you still have a choice. But because the pressure is so much, then I think the degree is so little in that case. And anyway, let's move on to the second one. Intensity or extent of the injury. The greater is the intensity or extent of the injury, the greater is the accountability. So if you steal money, let's say, again, using John Paul John as an example, he stole a loaf of bread. Where did he steal it? At the bakery. Okay? So probably the extent of injury that he has done to the owner is minimal. Probably nabawasan lang yung profit ng may-ari, na? But it would be different if he would steal the loaf of bread from an equally poor family. Na yun ang, let's say, lunch nila o dinner nila. So the extent of injury there is greater. Or let's say if you steal 10,000 pesos or what? If you steal 1,000 pesos from a poor man, it would be different if you steal 10,000 from, let's say, Lucio Tan. That would be different. Okay? Degree of involvement. The greater is the degree of involvement, the greater is the accountability. So this refers to a group crime. So the role that you play in that will determine the degree of your accountability. Degree of knowledge. The greater is the degree of knowledge, the greater is the accountability. So the more you know about the moral wrongfulness of the action, the greater is your accountability for such an act. Let me move on to another. Now, this is a controversial issue in the philosophy of action, at the same time ethics. I don't intend to make a resolution of this, but nonetheless, this is a very significant aspect of what we are discussing about. These are factors beyond our control. The accountability whose conditions for attribution we have discussed is of a general kind. Now, in the attribution of accountability of the moral kind, I'm now speaking more specifically about moral accountability. A certain controversy arises. On the one hand, we seem to be committed to what has been called the control principle, according to which we are morally accessible only to the extent that we are assessed. We are morally accessible only to the extent that what we are assessed for depend on factors under our control. This is implied by the intentionality condition, where we are only accountable for actions that we intended to perform. For instance, if we accidentally step on someone else's toes, we should not deserve blame for it because we did not intend to do it. The control principle has a corollary thesis, namely, two people ought not to be morally assessed differently if the only other differences between them are due to factors beyond their control. For instance, if two drivers have taken all precautions and are abiding by all the rules of the road, and in one case, a dog runs in front of the car and is killed, and not in the other, then given that the dog's running out was not something over which either driver had control, it seems that we are reluctant to blame one driver more than the other. Do you follow? On the other hand, there are a great number of cases which show that we are also committed to the opposite of what the control principle states. We seem to blame those who have murdered. We seem to blame those who have murdered more than we blame those who have merely attempted murder, even if the reason for the lack of success in the second case is that the intended victim unexpectedly tripped and fell to the floor just as the bullet arrived at head height. So there are also cases where we don't seem to be committed to the control principle. And this is shown by how our law punishes an act of murder and an act of simply attempted murder. Na? Magkaiba yung degree of punishment. Pero halimbawa, doon sa example, Kaya lang hindi na carry out yung murder, nadapa yung babarilin niya. So this is a factor not beyond his control. These cases point to a phenomenon that has been called by Bernard Williams as moral lack. Thomas Nagel defines it as follows: where a significant aspect of what someone does depends on factors beyond his control, yet we continue to treat him in that respect as an object of moral judgment, it can be called moral lack. Nelkin puts it as follows: moral lack occurs when an agent can be correctly treated as an object of moral judgment, despite the fact that a significant aspect of what he is assessed for depends on factors beyond his control. Williams gives the following example. Are you familiar with the painter Gauguin? Okay, anyway. A somewhat fictionalized Gauguin who chooses a life of painting in Tahiti over a life with his family. So, Gauguin has a family, and he decides to leave his family and go to Tahiti to pursue a career in painting, not knowing whether he will be a great painter or not. In one scenario, he goes on to become a great painter. That's one scenario. In another scenario, he fails. According to Williams, we will judge Gauguin differently depending on the outcome. In other words, how are we going to judge the value or the morality of Gauguin's leaving his family to pursue a career in painting? If Gauguin becomes a successful painter in one case, and in another case, Gauguin is a failure, are we going to have a different assessment here of the act of Gauguin in leaving his family? Another example, imagine that two otherwise conscientious people have forgotten to have their brakes checked recently and experience brake failure, but only one of whom finds a child in the path of his car. Our moral assessment of these two people will certainly be different. Hindi ba? The existence of moral lack is still being debated. Some have dismissed its possibility while some have asserted it. So this is an ongoing debate. This tells us that while I'm talking about accountability, this is still an ongoing debate. Okay, let me move on to the second part. We earlier noted that if the knowledge condition does not obtain, then there cannot be any attribution of accountability. Its non-attainment is one of the excusing conditions. But suppose a factory manager does not do preventive measures to protect the health of his workers from the hazardous fumes emitted in his factory. And as a result, many of his workers get seriously sick. Later on, when an investigation is done on the matter, the manager reasons that he does not know that such fumes are hazardous. Can we say here that the manager is excused from accountability? Is this a case where the knowledge condition does not obtain? We obviously would think that he is not excused from accountability. For not only is he capable of knowing the effects of the factory fumes on the health of his workers, but as a factory manager, it is his duty to know it. But how is this type of ignorance different from the ignorance of the child who shoots at a person using a real gun which he mistakes for a toy? This consideration calls for a distinction between two kinds of ignorance, which I shall call as follows: irresponsible ignorance and real ignorance. Irresponsible ignorance is the kind of ignorance where we can say to a person that he should have known better, while real ignorance is the kind of ignorance where we cannot say to a person that he should have known better. It is in this consideration it is only real ignorance that qualifies as an excusing condition. So we now qualify ignorance as an excusing condition because there are two types. The what I call real ignorance, where we can say to the ignorant person, we cannot say to the ignorant person that he should have known better. Irresponsible ignorance, we can say to the person that he should have known better. So if you say you are ignorant, but it's your duty to know it, so you are ignorant out of neglect, that's not an excusing condition. But what determines whether I should know better in a given condition? The following two questions are helpful. Do I have the capacity to know what I ought to know in a given situation? Given my role in a given situation, is it my duty to know what ought to be known in such a situation? What determines one's capacity to know are varied depending on the nature of the given situation. It can include maturity, mental health, and access to relevant information. In our example of the child mistaking the real gun for a toy gun, we cannot expect the child to know the relevant information, namely the difference between a real gun and a toy gun, and that it is wrong to fire a gun at a person. And this is because his biological capacity to know such information has not yet developed. Now, the person who mistakes the real gun for a toy may also be an adult already, but then he may be mentally handicapped. And so still the capacity to know is not there. On the other hand, what determines one's duty to know is one's role in a given situation. For instance, the factory manager that I earlier talked about, owing to his role as a factory manager, ought to know certain things, including whether the fumes emitted in his factory are hazardous to the health of his workers. And as such, his failure to know these things constitutes his negligence of his duty to know these things. In this regard, his ignorance of the things he ought to know is irresponsible. Okay. So if you say ignorance of the law is not an excuse, I think there's an assumed limit to that principle, because if you say that to a child or to a mentally handicapped, it does not apply because they don't have the capacity to know it. Although we can say we have the duty to know it, but because of certain conditions, it does not apply. Anyway, so that's real and irresponsible ignorance. Just to make it interesting, the example I give to my class, let's say there's a lifeguard, and then there's a drowning person in the swimming pool, but the lifeguard for some reason does not know how to swim. Okay, then you may ask, how come he becomes a lifeguard? Probably he's a relative of the owners, and he has a good body, so let's make him a lifeguard. So if he reasons that he wasn't able to save the drowning person because he didn't know how to swim, that cannot be accepted, because as a lifeguard, it's supposed to be his duty to know it. But let's say only the two of you are in a swimming pool, and then your friend is drowning, and only you can help your friend, but you don't know how to swim. Are you accountable? Can I say, you should have taken swimming in your PE? Can I say that? I don't think so. No? So whether you should have known better or not depends on certain situations. Let me now move on to another topic. Simple and complex acts. Consider the difference between the following two classes of acts. The first class includes raising one's arm, nodding one's head, winking, and smiling, while the second class includes playing basketball, playing the guitar, checking papers, and baking a cake.